G'day everyone. Today we're going to be looking at what factors to look at when you actually go fishing. So things like time of day, moon phase, current, tides, and the weather. So let's get straight into it. Let's start with time of the day. So when I look at time of the day, and remember all the stuff I'm going to talk about today in today's episode is all about planning to go fishing. So if I'm planning to go fishing in 3 days from now, a month from now, 6 months from now, there are certain things I can look at, especially leading up till that period. So whether you're going on a holiday or you're planning a fishing trip somewhere, these are things you can look at even if you're going to go fishing on the weekend as well. So it suits most cases for anyone who wants to go fishing. So let's start with time of the day. When I look at times in the day, I look at the 3 bite windows. I reckon sunrise, sunset, and midday. We've got those 3 sort of times of the day where fish will bite at different periods and for different levels. So when I'm looking at them, it will depend on what fish I'm going for. For example, snapper really love the sunrise and sunsets. They love low light conditions, all that sort of stuff. So if you can mix a low light condition into your fishing, that's really good. Now, when we talk about sunrise, you want to be there for first light. Okay, so there's a difference between sunrise and first light. First light's about 25 minutes before sunrise. So if you can get there probably 45 minutes to an hour before sunrise, you'll be able to hit that first light period and then the actual sunrise as well. Just that extra hour of actual fishing, not getting to the ramp and heading out around first light, is actually getting to your spot at first light and start fishing just before first light can exponentially increase your chances. Same with sunset. Sunset has last light, so it has sunset, last light, and then that's it. And then obviously it goes through the night and stuff like that. So if you can fish right up until that last light, you've got the right safety gear, you've got the right boat to be able to do whatever style of fishing you're looking at. If you're using those 2 times of the day, that's what you need to be looking at: sunrise, sunset, but more in particular, first light and last light. You want to make sure that you're there either at sunset past last light, or at sunrise you're there before first light. You're all set up, you're all ready to go, belly in the water, whatever it is that you do, that's what you should be doing. The other times is around midday. So midday, when the sun's at its brightest, is often really good for like flats fishing in that more visual style of fishing, because the sun is as high up as it can get in the sky. Now, in saying that, when it's this high up in the sky and you've got a beautiful blue, calm day, the fish can be quite wary, especially in really clear waters. So that midday at times can be quite tough to fish. If I was going to rank my 3 times of the day, it would depend on various species. But if we're talking generically, I'd go sunrise, sunset, and then midday. And sunrise and sunset would be like 51% sunrise, 49% sunset. They are so close, in my opinion, in regards to that. Whenever I've had sunset sessions, I've had some really good fishing in sunsets. In sunrises, I've had plenty of them. I reckon I've fished more sunrises than sunsets, though. But in saying that, at the same time, both of those will work dependent on other things as well. But that's the first thing I look at. What time is first light? So then I can start planning if I'm going in the morning. What time does that mean I need to be at the ramp and start fishing? And then at sunset, what time do I need to be there before sunset? So I normally, if I'm going to be fishing, say, a shallow reef on sunset, I'll try and get there an hour and a half, 2 hours at least before it. Because if that first drift, there's absolutely nothing across that reef and it's very dead, you can quickly jump to another spot before sunset. You're not just looking at one spot and that's the one spot you have for that whole session. So making sure that you can get there with the appropriate amount of time to be able to, 1, have a decent fish and a decent go at those spots, and 2, making sure that you're at those crucial times and you're all set up to go. Next thing I'm going to look at is the moon phase. So the moon affects tide. The tide affects the current, and it's all connected. Okay, so in the lead up to a full moon or a new moon, the tides will be a lot bigger. On the back end of a new moon leading up to a full moon, there's a lull of about a week and a half where the tides aren't as strong. Now, if you look at a tide chart, you'll see that it might have a 1.7 tide here in Sydney and a 0.5. Anything over a meter of tide is pretty good here in Sydney, like a pretty strong tide. Okay, now, when we're looking at tides are really important for fishing, depending on what type of fish you want to target. So, for example, flathead's the easiest one to do that. Flathead are very tough to fish for at the top of the tide, on that run-in tide. They're a lot easier to fish for on the run-out tide. They're more active during that period of time. They're still active during the run-in and the top of the tide. They're just more spread out. It's a lot harder to be able to congregate or find groups of flathead together, schooling up, looking and actively feeding. They're more searching around, looking for the prized catch at that high tide and stuff like that. So flathead, the last 3 hours of that tide, right up until it turns and comes back to a run-in tide, is probably the best time you can fish for any flathead. So again, if you're targeting flathead on plastics and you've got a sunrise or a sunset and you've got the last 3 hours of a run-out tide leading to them, or at the morning or in the afternoon, you have got two really, really good keys there that hopefully should increase your chances. Now, I'm not saying if there is a run out tide in the middle of the day for flathead that you won't catch any. You still will. Tide will overweigh the time of day for flathead. They're more tide dependent than other fish. Same again with like kingfish. Kingfish love tide. They love strong tides. They love being in those areas where the tide is running really, really fast and really, really strong. And that's where they'll be most active. They won't be as active in between the two moons. They'll be more active in the lead up to the moons and the lead up to the full moon. So lead up to the new moon and lead up to the full moon. They're so much more active during those times because of the gravitational pull of the moon that actually affects that tide. Speaking of the moons, when you look at your moon charts, you need to make sure that you're looking not just at what the moon is. So is it leading up to a new moon? Is it leading up to a full moon? Are we in between? You need to look at moon rises and moon sets. Moon rises and moon sets often will get the fish very active. If you compare a time of the day, so like a sunrise or a sunset, around a moonrise and a moon set, and also a tide change, for example, snapper, that's a really, really good keys to be able to catch snapper, all sorts of fish. Okay, so moon rises and moon sets are just as important as what type of moon it actually is. In between the new moon and the full moon, you'll still be able to catch fish. You just need to probably take the moon phase out of it and the tides out of it. You need to more now fish for the times of the day and around how and those specific parts in the tide. So if I'm in between two phases and I'm going for flathead on plastic, I'll make sure that I'm there at that bottom end of that tide, and I'm at somewhere where I know at the bottom of the tide there's going to be no water left because the flathead will be sitting there waiting for those bait fish to come off at the last second before there's no water left on that sand flat, for example. So not saying in between those moons there's not there's terrible fishing and you can't catch any fish. No, we're not saying that. We're saying that the lead up to the new moon and the couple of days after the new moon and the lead up to the full moon is generally the best times. So to be really specific about it, it's about 5-6 days leading up to the new moon and 3-4 days after the new moon I find is really, really good fishing. And about 5 to 6 days leading up to the full moon. The back end of the full moon generally isn't as good. Still get some really good fishing, but it generally isn't as good. Okay, so if you're planning a fishing trip, say you're heading to WA, you're heading overseas, wherever it is, as long as you can plan around that moon phase, you should hopefully find some really good conditions. The next thing to look at is swell. So obviously, if you've watched a lot of my episodes over time, you'll see the size of the boat I've got. I've got a 4.6 tiller boat. So it's not the biggest boat in the world to be able to go out offshore, but I still managed to do it. The reason why I managed to do this is because I pair up a lot of things. I pair up the swell and the wind. Okay, so if we have when you're looking at the swell, you have a swell height and a swell period. So swell height is the height of that wave. So if it's a 1.6 meter wave, then you know that it's going to be 1.6 meters tall on the sets that come in. Not every wave will be 1.6. Some of them will be bigger, some of them will be smaller, but on average, they should be around that 1.6 meter swell. The swell period is the distance or the time it takes for each wave to come. Okay, so if it's a 1.6 and 8 seconds, roughly every 8 seconds, there will be a wave coming. Okay. And then when we mix in the wind with that, we need to look at the wind direction and the swell direction. So the swell height, we've got a swell height, a swell period, and a swell direction as well. Now, depending on what time of the year, there is more traditional swells that happen during the winter, and there's more traditional swells that happen during the summer. Okay. Traditionally in the winter, our swells are either really, really big or really, really small and gentle. Okay, so during the summer, it's very rare for us to have a really big swell period where we have 2.5, 3 meters of swell for a significant period of time, let's say for a week. Whereas in the winter, that's not uncommon to see that. We often have really big southerly swells in the winter. And then in the summer, we will have more consistent, say 1 meter to 1.8 meter swell over a longer period of time. So for bigger boats, that's really good to go out offshore. During the summer, I tend to not go out offshore as much because one, the swell and the wind don't normally mix together. To give you an understanding, here off Sydney, the trade winds during the spring, summer, late autumn are nor'easterlies. So the majority of the winds we will see are either north, a nor'easter, or a nor'wester. The nor'westers is the ones you want in the summer because a westerly breeze helps to flatten out the waves. It's pushing west to east, from the west to the east, and now on the east coast, that's going to push right over those waves and sort of flatten them out a bit, make them a bit nicer. In the winter is where we see predominantly our southerly winds. Okay, we see more westerlies, more southwesterlies, more southerlies, and more southeasterlies. In the summer, we'll tend to see a lot of nor'easters, especially in the afternoon. So during winter, this is why I normally go out offshore during the winter, because we have longer periods of low swell. Okay, and we have shorter periods of big swell, which is fine. Don't go out offshore during that time. We have a much calmer window to go out offshore typically. Not all the time, but typically that's what will happen. When I'm fishing in winter, I'm looking at, again, that swell direction. If it's a southeasterly swell direction, okay, and you've got a northwest wind, which rarely will happen, that's a really, really good one. But if you've got a southwest wind, pretty much any of those swell directions that will happen during winter, and we have a southwesterly wind, you'll see a lot calmer conditions out offshore. So if it says it's a 1.5 meter swell, the waves are still going to be 1.5. There's no doubt about that. The swell height won't change too much by the wind. What the wind will do is determine how powerful those waves can be at times, especially while you're driving around. They can be quite calm, a bit more rolly swell. With the trade winds in the winter, those south and southeasterly winds, especially if they're up nice and high, say if they're at 25, 30 k's an hour, for me, that's quite high in my boat, you'll see that it will stay at that. It won't go to 10 to 15 k's an hour. It will often be very consistent throughout the day. So if it says it's going to blow 10 kilometers from the southwest, it's going to blow 10 kilometers from the southwest the whole day. Okay, you're not going to see it go below. You might see it go above that. So that's why you need to sort of check the weather and make sure you're looking at it appropriately. Wind plays a big thing, especially out offshore. It doesn't play as much inshore. So if you're in rivers and stuff, you can often find quiet areas where you're protected from wind and stuff like that. But when you're out offshore, there's hardly anything that can protect you from wind and swell and all that sort of stuff. So that's why it's so crucial. And over the years, that's why I've been looking at a lot. So if it was a perfect day and I was going to go out offshore, again, catching snapper, I want a westerly wind. I want as low of a swell as I can, but in the lead up to that day, I want a lot of big swell to mix up all the reefs, to break the congee up, to break the reef up and create that natural burley trail to entice the snapper in nice and shallow. And then on the day that I go fishing, I want a nice, beautiful westerly wind, southwesterly preferably. Southwesterly is a really, really nice wind where I live. And a nice low swell, something below 1.3 meters. 1.4, yeah, I can sort of fish in that. If it's down to 0.9, that's even better. It almost turns out to be like a river. It's so much easier for me to get around. But at the same time, sometimes when it's 0.9 of a meter and it's the perfect glasshead day, the fish aren't active. There's nothing really to get the fish active. There might not have been a moonrise or moonset. There might not have been a tide change or anything like that has affected what I'm going to do while I'm fishing. And that will often turn the fish off and make it a really bad session. You're like, but hang on, I was fishing the lead up to the new moon. Everything was good. It was just the swell and the wind weren't there. And then therefore the fish weren't there at all. So all of those factors that we've talked about so far play a key part in deciding what you want to do. Obviously, if the first thing I normally look at is the wind, what's the wind look like? If the wind's too high up, it's going to be too hard for me to go out offshore. So that cancels half of the fishing styles that I normally go out and do. If the wind's nice, then I'll move on to the swell. And this is the order that I normally generally do because of the boat that I have, and two, the time that I can actually go fishing. Like most people, I can only go fishing on the weekends and only have 4 or 5 hours to go fishing on either Saturday or Sunday. So first thing I look at, like I said, was the wind. Is the wind, say, below 25 k's an hour? If it's below 25 k's an hour, then I'm going to look at the swell. Is the swell below 1.4? Now, if I'm sort of going, oh, it's about 20, 25 k's and it's 1.4, they're both going to cancel each other out and probably be too hard for me to go fishing. But if they're both good, then I move on to the next thing. Which is the time of day. What time of day do I want to actually go? Is the time of day linked up to a moonrise or moonset or a tide change? Is the sunrise got a better tide change or a moonrise or moonset? Or is the sunset got a better tide change and a moonrise or a moonset? Okay, so it's like a checkbox, and you start at the top for whatever suits your needs will be the way you look at it. Another thing to look at is air pressure, so the barometric pressure. Barometric pressure often plays, again, a determining factor as to whether fish may or may not bite, especially in the summer. Barometric pressure in the summer can fluctuate quite a lot, with a lot of westerly storms that come from the west then go across to the east. Those storms normally affect the barometric pressure quite a lot, either seeing it dropping or rising very sharply. And that often will turn the fish on. The fish will think, oh, there's a storm coming. It could be anything. I need to start feeding now. And they all of a sudden go into this really hyper feed mode. Looking at the barometer, if it's a rising barometer, that's really good. There's a saying, 1,020 fish are plenty. If the barometer is above 1,020, generally the fishing's pretty good. If it's below that, it still is pretty good. It's just depending on how well you rank the barometer in your understanding of fishing and the forecast within fishing. The barometer I have up pretty high in my ranking system. So it's sort of the last thing I look at, because I need to understand a lot of other things first for me in my boat. Now, if I had a 6.5 meter boat, maybe I'll look at the air pressure first and the moon phase and stuff like that, because I could go out offshore fishing in a lot more conditions compared to a smaller boat. Where a smaller boat, I have a narrow window to be able to fish and a narrow group of conditions that are conducive to being able to go out offshore. So when we're looking at all of these sorts of stuff, again, there's multiple different weather apps. I've got Willy Weather, I've got Windy, I've got the Bomb, I've got a fishing app called Fish Ranger, which is also a really good one to use that has a lot of the information. I've got the paid version of that. If you can afford to get the paid version, I would highly suggest that. That's probably my number one app to look at all this sort of stuff. It has a lot of information for you on that app. But if you're not willing to pay for stuff like Willy Weather, I use that for 5 or 6 years. I use Windy for 5 or 6 years. I use the Bomb app as well for 5 or 6 years, and use those three and group them all together. Now I've just added the Fish Ranger app. It's just got a bit more detail for me, a bit more different wind charts and all that sort of stuff for me to actually have a look at as well. Just more information for me to look at, and I feel like it's a bit more consistent than other apps. In regards to those apps, when you go onto those apps and say, for example, you're looking at the wind, you might say you're looking at the wind for your house, but your house is a 20-minute drive from the boat ramp. Okay. What you need to look at is obviously pick a spot that's near where you're going to fish. When you look at the wind that's going to be predicted there, what you need to look at is actually where is that wind being recorded live as well. So, for example, if I was going to go out on Saturday morning to go for a fish, as soon as I wake up, I'll quickly have a look at the weather. I'll look at the live wind, okay, and the live swell, and make sure that sort of matches up what the forecast had said, because there's no point packing all my stuff for snapper and not bringing anything for the estuary and go out offshore and realize that I can't go fishing out there. Then I'll have to come home, grab all my estuary rods and stuff like that, and then change tack. Okay, so if you can make sure you know when you're looking at those wind apps, make sure you know where it's being recorded. So here in the Cronulla region and the Botany region, a lot of the wind reports are taken from Kurnell. Kurnell is a place where they record the wind, and then it's posted up into apps like, for example, Willy Weather. So make sure, even though you might change the location of where you're going to fish, make sure you know where that actual wind is being recorded. It's not being recorded at that exact spot that you might want to go fishing. Okay, it might be recorded 10 k's down the road, and that might be completely different to where you are going to fish. So in summary, there are all the factors I look at when I'm planning to go for a fish. I'm looking at time of day, looking at the moon phase, I'm looking at the current and the tides and the level of current and tides that there are. Obviously, I'm going to be looking at the weather, so the generic weather, looking at the barometer, and then finally, I'm making sure that I've got the best weather apps that I can use. Okay. Now, if we're going to rank a lot of these things that are dependent for me, one, I'm going to be fishing around sunrise or sunset. That's a given. I know I will often not go fishing at 8 o'clock in the morning and come back at 3 o'clock. Okay, so most of my fishing is done around sunrise or sunset naturally. So that probably takes out the time of day for me, because naturally I'll just go fishing around those times. Okay, the next thing I would sort of rank as the most important for me is moon phase and tides. So the next thing I'll rank, I guess, after the time of day, because I sort of cancel that out, the two most important things for me are wind and swell. Okay, because even if the moon phase, the tides aren't really lining up, I'll still want to go for a fish, because I know I'm going to learn just as much at those times. I might be able to learn a different technique, a spot that works really well when fishing is tough. It's really, really good to be able to go out and not just go, you know what, there's not a tide change around sunrise or sunset. Oh, we're not in a good moon phase, or there's not a good moonrise or moonset. I'm just not going to go fishing. If the weather's good, I'm going fishing. So wind and swell are my top two ones. Again, that is very dependent on the vessel that you are using. The bigger your vessel, the more leeway you have in regards to the weather. So wind and swell might not come into it as big of a factor as it does for me. After that, I've got a really good wind. I've got really good swell. Cool. I can go out offshore, or I can fish the river, whatever it is. My next one is, what is the tide and current doing? So have we got a strong run out tide, or have we got a pretty lackadaisy current, either being a run in or a run out, where it's not going to be pushing a lot of water. It's only going to be pushing a small amount of water, and that will affect what I go out and do and what species I'll normally target for that sort of stuff. After that, I'm going to be looking at my moon phases, my moon rises and moon sets. Again, I'm not as lucky as maybe some other people around the world, where I don't have every day to be able to go for a fish, and I think that might be relatable to most fishermen. They can't go fishing every single day of the year and pick the best times. Okay, so the weather for me is most important, mainly because I need to make sure that I'm safe and I can go do what I want to do, and so on and so forth. Okay. And to leave you with a little tip that I guess I've learned over the last year, and if you've stuck around long enough, you're going to get a nice tip for catching snapper this winter. If you can get a time of the day, so a sunrise or a sunset, you can get a moon phase, so a sunrise, a moon set or a moon rise, and a tide change around sunrise or sunset, you're going to whack them in shallow. You are going to smash them. Over the last year, that's the one big key thing. If I can get two of those three around, particularly a tide change or a moonrise or set around a sunrise or sunset, yeah, you're going to be catching some snapper. It's so good. It's so much fun. And I hope you all enjoy that little tip. Make sure that you're looking at those weather apps. Make sure that you're understanding how to read them and what that means for you and your fishing. Don't forget, go Seven Seas Apparel. Got a brand new Seven Seas Apparel t-shirt on right now. Got their beanie as well. They just dropped a brand new beanie as well. It looks phenomenal. Don't forget to use code REALFishing10 as always to save yourself 10% off at checkout. So that's REEL Fishing 10 to save yourself 10% off at checkout. And I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope you all learned something. Leave a thumbs up if you did. Let me know what you want me to talk about next. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.